Welcome. I'm Sonia Wood, a certified floodplain manager, CFM with H2O Partners, here to talk to you about the role played by the elevation certificate in floodplain management. I want to especially address those professionals who've just become their community's new floodplain manager, or those who have floodplain management as one of several duties in their job description. Now that you're on board as your community's floodplain management professional, you'll need to become better acquainted with one of the most important and versatile tools used in the National Flood Insurance Program. Not only is this tool versatile, but at times it can be considered complex, time-consuming, and valuable, especially when it comes to floodplain and flood risk management. That tool is FEMA's Elevation Certificate. It's so versatile that floodplain professionals like you use it to manage your compliance efforts. Insurance agents utilize it to determine how much your citizens will pay for flood insurance, and those same citizens will, from time to time, use it to petition FEMA to amend or correct its flood map. So now that you've been introduced to how valuable and versatile the Elevation Certificate is, you may want to spend the next few minutes with me to get an even better understanding of that value and versatility. Let's start by looking at your connection to the Elevation Certificate. At times, you're going to have to advise builders, developers, and even property owners who want to build structures in your community's identified floodplain areas. They may seek your assistance on how to build in the floodplain. You will need to explain to them what your floodplain management ordinance requires in terms of elevating buildings in special flood hazard areas, those A and V zones. And you'll need to point out to them that this all needs to be documented on the FEMA Elevation Certificate. Documenting this activity usually includes a floodplain development permit and an elevation certificate or equivalent documentation. The first two forms are required in the community's application toward participation in the Community Rating System, or CRS, which is another topic for another time. Here's something for you to think about. What flood zones are considered the Special Flood Hazard Areas, SFHAs? Answer A and V, or is it answer B, C, and X? The correct answer is A, which equals A and V are the high-risk flood zones and special flood hazard areas. Answer B are the B, C, and X zones, which are the low to moderate risk flood zones. The concept of building higher and drier is relatively simple. Newly built structures in special flood hazard areas, as well as rebuilt substantially damaged buildings or substantially improved buildings in floodplains, need to have their lowest floors elevated at or above the base flood elevation, or BFE. In other words, those buildings have to be built above the flood level established by FEMA on your community's flood map. Now, you should check your community's floodplain management ordinance to see what standard you've adopted. Sometimes communities require that buildings be constructed at a certain number of feet above the predicted flood level. That is called free board. No, not free bird, free board. And it's the elevation certificate that sorts all this out. It documents the elevation of buildings in relation to the base flood elevation. Each building has an established lowest floor elevation that can change based on the flood zone or type of building. For example, in non-elevated buildings like slab-on-grade or basement buildings that are in A flood zones, the actual top of the bottom floor in the building is considered the lowest floor. In buildings that have a floor elevated in order to get it above the base flood elevation, the elevated floor may be considered the lowest floor if the enclosure below it has proper flood openings in it. Finally, in coastal V zones, determining the lowest floor is a little bit different. You may be looking at the elevation certificate to find something called the lowest horizontal structural member to decide whether the building is properly elevated. The primary place you're going to look at on the elevation certificate for this information is in Section C. Section C of the elevation certificate is entitled Building Elevation Information. It contains a host of valuable measurements in, on, and around that building. This elevation certificate information is the key to you being able to evaluate whether a building has been constructed in compliance with your community's floodplain management ordinance. It's also information that an insurance agent will eventually use to determine how much this property owner's flood insurance policy will cost. And at other times, some of the information located in this section might be used by property owners in your community to challenge the accuracy of the flood map. Here's something else to think about. Where must the lowest floor elevation of a newly constructed building in the special flood hazard area be located? Is it A, at or above the base flood elevation? Or is it B, the top of the bottom floor? The correct answer is A, at or above the base flood elevation, or BFE. That's EC box B9. Answer B, the top of the bottom floor, or C2A, may be the lowest floor elevation. However, based on the flood zone and building type, C2B, C, or D may be the lowest floor elevation. When an elevation certificate indicates that a building's lowest floor is elevated at or above the base flood elevation, not only is the flood risk reduced, but the flood insurance policy premium would be more favorable as well. Ensuring that new construction, substantially damaged, or substantially improved buildings in flood-prone areas are properly elevated will benefit property owners, communities, and states before, during, and after a flood. Oh, and one other thing you should realize when it comes to the elevation certificate. Even though surveyors, engineers, and architects are usually the individuals completing elevation certificates for those builders, developers, or property owners, most people will consider you the keeper of elevation certificates in your community. So expect insurance agents, property owners, real estate agents, surveyors, engineers, architects, and even others to come to you looking to see if an elevation certificate exists for a particular property. You may not always have one on file, but many times you will be tapped as the go-to resource for this information. If an elevation certificate doesn't exist, a surveyor, engineer, or architect will need to be hired, usually by the property owner, to complete one. Okay, that's a lot of general information in a short amount of time, but you can find more specific information about determining lowest floors and interpreting the elevation certificate by reviewing elevation certificate information on FEMA's website at fema.gov. or by visiting the NFIP's official website, floodsmart.gov. Also, consider becoming a Certified Floodplain Manager, CFM, through the Association of State Floodplain Managers by logging on to floods.org. This is Sonia Wood for H2O Partners, hoping you'll return often to our Floodplain Management website to learn more about the elevation certificate and other NFIP topics. And thank you for getting with the program, the National Flood Insurance Program.